Welcome to the ADA Compliance and Concrete Construction Standards conference call. At this time, all lines are in a listen-only mode. Later, we will conduct a question-and-answer session. Please note that this conference is being recorded. I would now like to turn the call over to Carlos Libran. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carlos Libran. I'm the Standards Engineer for the Michigan Department of Transportation. And I want to thank Todd for inviting me and for Terry and Trish for helping me learn how to actually present at a webinar. I've never done that before. We're talking today about accessible design and construction. The ADA is a law that I'm sure everyone is aware of that makes it illegal for anyone to discriminate against persons with disabilities in many aspects of life. And in particular, today we're going to talk about public accommodation and sidewalk ramps. What I want to do today is not just help you understand what the requirements are, but understand what's behind the requirements to help you deal with them when you're out constructing these facilities. First, I want to talk a little bit about standards. First of all, PROAG, the Public Rights of Way Accessibility Guidelines, is a national guidelines that the federal highway is recommending that the states follow. Most state standards follow that. You may hear other national standards like UFAS or ADAG mentioned. These are all older standards and standards that really deal more with buildings and facilities. So state and local standards are more than likely going to follow PROAG. And also, state standards may vary from state to state too, because they can meet or exceed federal standards. And even in Michigan, there are a couple of standards that we actually exceed. So when you're looking at the standards, make sure you follow the state and local standards as well as the federal standards. The thing with curb ramps, and I'm going to be talking mostly about curb ramps today because due to the fact that we only really got 1 hour, I mean, we could talk all day about all the other facilities, but curb ramps, you got to look at them as the sum of the parts, really. You can't get too hung up on each individual portion and what's more important than the other. In the end, you really got to take a look at these things as a whole, step back, look at the ramp as a whole, then you'll be able to make decisions as you go. The first word of caution when it comes to the ADA is they don't have a construction tolerance on anything that's a maximum or minimum. You got to allow for finishing inconsistencies. What I tell our designers is don't design to the maximums or the minimums, because you're putting that guy in the field, you're putting him on a tight wire, you're cornering them, because in reality, we're not talking about laser precision out in the field. So you got to give them some kind of cushion, some kind of room to work with. I'm going to start with running slopes and counter slopes. So those are probably two of the basic elements. The running slope being 8.33% maximum, an inch per foot, and 5% maximum on the counter slope. The thing to remember, if you've never been in a wheelchair, you should try it. These maximum slopes, and I've tried it myself, some of these slopes really don't look that steep. They may be 8.5% or 9%. And visually, they don't look that steep, but if you try it, the problem is not so much upper body strength to get up there, but there's balance too. You can see in the picture here, this guy's leaning forward. It may not be that steep a slope, but if you're going up the ramps and they're even a little too steep, the more you crank, the more that front wheel tends to pop up, causing an unstable situation. And on the bottom, you want to make sure that counter slope is no more than 5%. You got to keep it flat, otherwise you're going to snag that smaller caster in the front or the footrest and send somebody toppling forward. Cross slope, the minimum cross slope is 2% maximum. Again, there's no tolerance. The thing with cross slope, besides the fact that you got that tipping sensation on a steep cross slope, it's really an issue with direction. To steer your wheelchair in a straight line when you're on a steep cross slope, you almost have to lock up the bottom wheel and really crank hard on the top wheel just to go in a straight line. And for some of you cold weather states like we are in Michigan, you add snow and ice to that, to that equation, and then you're really in some big trouble. Widths and turns, maximum width or minimum width of a sidewalk ramp is 4 feet. In Michigan, we go with 5 feet on our standard because 5 feet you can fit 2 wheelchairs side by side. And also, there's another requirement for sidewalks that if your sidewalk is not at least 5 feet, then you're going to have a 5 by 5 passing space every 200 feet. Now, the top flat area there, we're used to calling that a landing. That's one of the things that the PROAG has changed the terminology. They're calling it turning space now because in the context of a street corner where you have a curb ramp, the purpose of that flat area is not a resting spot, but it's a spot for a wheelchair to have a nice flat, safe area to make turns and turn in the direction they want to go. So in this, the maximum slope is 2% in the direction of travel. The PROAG used to say 2% in any direction, but as we know, that's never going to work. You've got diagonal directions that are going to mess that up. So 2% in the direction of travel. And in this slide here, if you don't have that other leg of sidewalk on the side there, that means you wouldn't even need the flat spot. You could just have your ramp going up to the existing sidewalk grade and elevation. Detectable warnings, they're not as strange to us as they used to be about 5 or 6 years ago when they finally became a real requirement. I think a lot of people, including myself, really didn't understand these things, what to do with them, and I found that really one of the key things to know is what they're for, and helps you understand what to do with them. The reason for the detectable warning is it advises a person who is blind that they've come to the end of the sidewalk, they're leaving the safety of the sidewalk, and they're about to enter traffic. That's all it's for. It's not a wayfinding device that's been a misnomer for a long time. It does not tell the person who's blind which way to go once they've crossed that line. This slide here on the left-hand side, you'll see that we have a sidewalk ramp that's kind of going off in a direction in the middle of the intersection, and then you have to make a turn to get to the receiving ramp on the other side of the road. So intuitively, you might think that, well, we ought to tip that detectable warning plate so we can tell the person which way to go. That's not what they're for. If you want to provide wayfinding, the best way to do that is to direct the ramp itself in the direction you want them to go. Detectable warning should be the full width of the ramp. If you've got a 4-foot ramp, it should be 4 foot, 5 foot, 5, and 10 foot should be 10. That doesn't include any flares on the sides or the curb on the side of the ramp. The depth in the direction of travel should be 2 feet, and that's based on research done nationally that tells us that with 2 feet, it's less likely that someone's going to overstep the detectable warning. Installation technique, there's a lot of different products out there, as you all know. There's the hard plastic, there's cast iron and stainless steel. Best thing I can really tell you is to follow the manufacturer's recommendation for installation. A lot of them have nice videos out there already, and they've got written instructions. And it's important that you really take those seriously. I know the plastic products, like you see on the upper left, you see the guy tamping it down with a mallet, and it's important that from what I'm told from the manufacturers, it's really the important thing is to tap all the air out of there. Some will take a 2x4 and tap the mallet on the 2x4, but get the air out of there. Where there's air, there's going to be water, and if you're in Michigan like me, where there's water, there's going to be ice and freezing, and that's one of the reasons these things pop out. The stainless steel and the cast iron products, the videos I've seen of installation, I've seen them stepping these in like they're showing in here. I think the one thing I'd caution is if you're stepping them in, don't go too wild on it, or make sure that the guy to the left isn't 50 pounds heavier than the guy on the right. Because as you're on that thing, maybe rocking it back and forth, you could goof up your cross slope, and guess what? Lawyers have gone out to Home Depot and bought themselves digital levels, and they know what to look for, so they're looking for things like that. stamping these detectable warnings, now there's nothing in the standards or national standards that says you can't stamp these in. In Michigan, we don't allow stamped detectable warnings. We haven't had very good luck with those. The reason being, first of all, installation control, inconsistent. When you put these templates down and start mashing them down a little bit and peel them off, a lot of times you're going to be missing maybe a quarter or a third of these domes sometimes. And the biggest thing is short-term disability. You all being concrete contractors, you know that the weakest part of concrete is at the very top where you just have the paste and there's no aggregate interlock, so that's really the weakest part of the concrete. So we found that after maybe one season, you get plows going through and plowing off snow, these things just shred off really easy and wear out pretty quick. Contrast, what color should these things be? The national spec ADAG used to have 70% reflectance. They've taken that out, gone away from there, because when you put a light meter on these things, it depends on what time of day you're measuring the reflectance, and it also knocked out a lot of colors and a lot of products that were actually fine. So they went with a spec that said light on dark or dark on light. And that's probably one of the vaguest specs I've ever seen. So the best thing I can do really is to tell you why we need the contrast, what it's for. Of course, it's not for a person who's totally without vision. It's not for a sighted person or a person in a wheelchair. What it's for is persons with low vision, a person who has degenerative loss of their visions, maybe macular degeneration. When they're starting to lose their vision, this is their world. This is what it looks like for them. It's kind of a blur. So we're looking for something that's going to give them some kind of a target, enough contrast to give them some kind of a target. And you'll see that some of them provide more contrast than others, even the upper right one provides a little bit of contrast. But if you step back across the street, you see that the gray one kind of disappears. And there's use for the gray ones when you got the brick paver sidewalks. Sometimes that provides better contrast. But again, it's for persons with low vision. So when you're picking out what color it should be, that's what you have to have in mind. A lot of these things come in tiles. You don't want to stagger them. Most of the time, street corners are not 90 degrees. They're on radius, and you got a kind of a skew in front, and these tiles don't actually line up. You don't want to stagger them because then you're going to have a lot of holes in there for people to overstep. What you want to do is to have full coverage in each direction of travel. You don't want any gaps for somebody to overstep. Now, placement of detectable warnings, that's also been a point of confusion. And really the key thing is to find out, first of all, where the grade break is on the ramp. Where does that ramp slope stop and the counter slope start? And how far is that grade break from the street? And it'll tell you which way to orient. First of all, the grade break should be 90 degrees to the path of travel on the ramp. The reason for that is, if you have a skewed grade break, a wheelchair approaching that grade break, when it hits the grade break, at some point, you're going to have one wheel up in the air, causing, again, instability and a dangerous situation. In order to get 90 degrees, there's a couple ways to do that. You can orient the ramp on a radius so that it is 90 degrees, or if you want to keep the alignment of the ramp right in alignment with the sidewalk, and you don't want to turn it, what you can do is move the grade break back so that one point of the grade break is at the back of curb and the other part is kind of floating at a certain distance. Now that space, the little triangular space in front of that grade break should be flat. Anywhere from 2 to 5%, keep it as flat as possible. Again, so you don't get that skewed grade break that's going to tip one wheel up. Now when you move the grade break back in that manner, the floating end, that X distance there, if it's less than or equal to 5 feet, you want to put your detectable warning behind the grade break. Everything's nice and squared up. It's 90 degrees just like the grade break. However, if that grade break gets to be more than 5 feet, then it's a miscue for the person who's blind as to how far they really are from the street. It increases their crossing distance and their crossing time. So in that case, when it's greater than 5 feet, you want to move it to the back of curb. And you'll see that when you do that, the orientation get skewed. That's okay. Remember, it's not a wayfinding device. And this is just another illustration of that. You'll see that on the left, they've moved the grade brake back so that one edge is the back curb and the other end's floating, and which is fine, but the distance of that floating edge, more than 5 feet, it should be moved to the back curb. One of the questions also has been, when I put it to the back of curb, how close to the back curb should I have it? Earlier versions of the ProAg had it at 6 to 8 inches, and then they changed that and said it should be right tight up to the back of curb, which, as you all know, is pretty impractical. So the latest version that came out 2011, they've changed it to 2 inches. And when you're on a radius like this, and if you don't want to put radius coverage or radius tiles on there, and you put it across, then the 2 inches is measured at the ends of the radius. So in the center, the offset isn't quite as important. We talked a little bit about counter slopes earlier, 5% maximum. One thing to be aware of is in order to get that 5% maximum at the bottom of the ramp, you may have to do some transitioning of the gutter pan on either side of the ramp. I know our standards here in Michigan, the standard gutter slope is actually steeper than 5%. So be aware that you may have to do some work on either side of the ramp as well. Always have flush transitions. You don't want to leave any lips for that caster to trip on. And one of the things I like to point out on this slide is that upper left slide there, that's built pretty good, 5% counter slope. And you'll see that even with 5% counter slope, that clearance for that footrest isn't very big, so there's not a lot of play there. So you want to make sure that you don't go more than 5%. Talk a little bit about side flares. When you've got your sidewalks, some of these wider sidewalks, downtown areas, to come to the back of curb, if you've got a walkable surface that's going to cross the ramp, you don't want anybody tripping over. Again, it's not necessarily for persons with disabilities. It's for you and me, people who walk around not paying attention, or you're texting and walking at the same time. You don't want to be falling over. So if you've got walkable surfaces on either side of the ramp, then you have to have a flare that's no more than 10% maximum slope. And if you've got side-by-side flared ramps like this, that means that curb at the center is going to drop a little bit lower in order to accommodate your flare. Now, if you don't have a walkable surface on either side, or you have a permanent object, then you can use something that's more of a rolled curb. It doesn't necessarily have to be vertical. It doesn't have to. I mean, there's really no requirement for how much slope that flare has to have or that side has to have. It's just that it doesn't have to be limited to that 10% maximum. I know that I've seen some slides with the curb perpendicular, or it's a perpendicular curb, and I know here in Michigan the snowplows absolutely don't like that. Directional ramps are preferred for optimal wayfinding. If at all possible, when you've got 2 directions, have 2 separate ramps going in those directions. You want to avoid diagonal type crossings, and you'll see in this slide here too, there's a separation there with a non-walkable surface. You don't even have to worry about flares, but that should always be the first choice. And that's what I tell designers is go for directional ramps. Now in the real world, there's not always room for directional ramps. So what do? They have something in the ProAg called blended transitions, and that's where the curb cut goes completely around the radius and covers both directions. Our Michigan version is a depressed corner. That's a term they've added to the ProAg this last time around as part of what they call blended transition. And what we do is we flatten out that center part to 2%. That serves as a turning space so that we're not making people turn outside of the sidewalk in traffic. We're letting them do all their turning outside of traffic. And you'll see again that the detectable warning covers that entire radius. Anywhere where you don't have curb, where you're taking the curb out, you've got to have detectable warnings. Before detectable warnings came, before curb ramps came even, the person who was blind would use the curb drop as their cue from their cane as to the fact that they're about to leave the sidewalk and get into the street. So now we've taken that away, and we're putting in ramps, and we're trying to tell people to keep it as flat as possible. So this is how we tell them this is now their new cue that replaces the curb. At radiuses, you can have radius installations. They look a lot nicer, and most of the manufacturers of detectable warnings do produce these things in curved sections for several different radii. What I'm told is make sure that you pre-order these things ahead of time, so you're not waiting for the radiuses that you're asking for. And again, they don't make it for every radius. They don't fit every single radius of every corner. So you may end up having to do some cutting and mitering to get these things in. And when you do that, the grid orientation is not going to be a square grid pattern anymore. It's going to kind of sweep, but that's okay. Again, remember, it's not to tell a person which way to go. I know one manufacturer has showed me that they've kind of got down to an art where they can actually even miter and cut these things in a manner that the cut domes kind of line up at the edges, and you don't really have any partial domes. Now, chasing grades, we talked about the running slope being a maximum of 8.33%. Now, what do you do if the natural terrain, the road grade and the sidewalk grade itself is pretty steep? It's 8.3 or something even steeper, and now you're asking me to put in an 8.33% ramp, and you may have to chase that to the next county to meet the existing grade. That's actually something that the ProAg did take into consideration, so they put in what I like to call the 15-foot rule. The maximum ramp slope is 8.33%. However, they don't expect you to run a ramp more than 15 feet. So what that means is that if that terrain is that steep, you can run a ramp to whatever slope you need to get it 15 feet, get the existing grade. But one of the things that I caution is that if it's close, if you have to go maybe 20 feet or 25 feet to get the 8.33%, I think it's worthwhile to go a little further. That's not an absolute like the maximum 8.33%. That 15 foot is an absolute. Use some judgment if you can go a little bit further, and it's practical to do so, and go a little bit further to flatten it out. Matching cross slopes to crossroads. If you're dumping out a curb ramp into a crossroad, and the crossroad is pretty steep, what happens to the cross slope on the ramp? You've got to meet that road grade at some point. Now, for a new roadway, there's no leeway at all. What you have to do is you have to flatten out the crossing itself. Now, when I say new roadway, I'm talking about a roadway that's originally installed where no roadway was. You're going through a wheat field in Kansas and you're putting in a new road, then all bets are off. You have to meet the standards. You have to flatten out you have to table off the crossing and then meet that 2% cross slope on the ramp. However, for existing roads in an alteration, you can transition that cross slope on the ramp to meet the road grade. It'll look something like this. Start off flat at the bottom and then gradually meet the road grade that you have to meet. It's not expected in an alteration that you reconstruct all your drainage and all your grades on the road, on an existing road. And I recommend that you transition to the full length of the ramp, because you don't want any abrupt twists in the cross slope. Physical constraints, we all know that the world isn't flat, and in a lot of cases you're not going to be able to meet every aspect of the standards. So in alterations, again, for an existing road, you have to meet the requirements for new construction to the maximum extent practicable within the scope of the project. Scope of the project, a couple of examples I use is that if the roadway work is just maybe a microsurface or something like that, and you're not buying right of way, you're not expected to buy a right of way just so that you can make a ramp work. Same thing with utilities. If you've got just minor work being done on the road and you're not moving any utilities for any other reason within the scope of the project, we wouldn't be expected to move utilities just to make a ramp compliant. The thing is, when you don't meet 100% compliance, it's got to be documented. And it's really, that's really on the owner, on the local agency or the state that owns it. We have to document. So if you as the contractor, if you get some plans and you see that it's not going to work, communicate with the owner, communicate with the engineer, and make sure they know so that they can document the reason why for their files. And always think accessibility first. Think in terms of maximum accessibility first, then balance your requirements. I talked about this a little bit earlier. When you look at standards, you don't want to start playing the game of, well, what's more important? Is it the dimensions of the landing or the turning space, or is it the running slope or the cross slope? Which one, if I have to sacrifice, which one do I sacrifice? You got to think in terms of accessibility. Like I said, you got to step back and look at the thing as a whole. Whatever you do, don't make it worse than it is. I've seen some cases where that's happened, where good intentions. There was one where we had a building close up tight to the right of way on a corner, and the ramp was steep, and the designer decided, well, I want a 5x5 landing, which shortened up the ramp, made it steeper, so you had a nice flat landing that no one would be able to make it up because it's gotten too steep. So don't make it worse than it already is. And this is more a look at reality. This is what you see. You can look at a lot of state standards and a lot of local standards, but you're not going to see something like this. This is what you really see in any small town USA. And in this one, you'll see that the ramp itself, there's no flares there. There's no place there for you have to cross over these steep humps to get to the ramp. Looks like some kind of a turning space up the top there. You're limited as to what you can do with that because you'll see that little trellis there. There's stairs going down there, and then a ramp going up to this house. On the left side, you got a bridge. There's not a whole lot you can do a lot of times with a bridge. So you start to brainstorm a little bit. And this is kind of the brainstorming, not a real good illustration. I'm not an artist. But if you think in terms of what do I have to do, I have to, first of all, get them off the road. So get them off the road onto a flat area, and then start ramping them in a direction so they can continue travel. Again, that landing they had was locked in, so we put the ramp somewhere else. It's not perfect. See, the ramp on the right has some skews in it. But again, those are the kind of decisions you have to make. And this is what it looks like now. Again, not perfect, but it's accessible. Person in a wheelchair can get out of traffic. What you want to do is you want to get them out of traffic and then get them in the direction they want to go. This gets them out of traffic, gives them two options to go left or right. And we blocked off that little drop-off as well. Here's another example, anywhere USA. You always have tight right-of-way, buildings up close. You got utilities all over the place, and this sidewalk is actually about 1.5 feet higher than the street, so that's going to really play into your ramp slopes. And this is what happened when the consultant designer looked at the standard and tried to force that standard plan in this situation. At the very bottom, everything's fine. You got nice flat ramps. You have nice turning spaces. You got detectable warnings. But beyond that, it just doesn't work. You don't want to sacrifice accessibility just to meet a standard. Again, people get real nervous about standards and meeting standards without looking at accessibility. In this case, once you get out of the street, now you've got about a 26.5% grade to get back on the sidewalk. Now, that's not just bad for the person with disability. It's bad for the person without disabilities. And believe me, the city manager was not happy with this at all. They were like a few months away from their summer festival in their downtown area, and he was furious. So back at the napkin design after the fact. But again, think accessibility. Get them off the road. Somehow get them in the direction they want to travel. So we ended up with something like this. You're not going to find this on anybody's standard because it's going to be just one of those hybrid cases. And that's why I say that standards are good. They are not a recipe. Standards are by no means a recipe. They are ingredients that you have to use, and you come up with your own recipe a lot of the times. So it's a big balancing act. Again, know the standards, know what the ingredients are of the standards, what you're trying to accomplish, and then try to put that together as something accessible. Again, get the person safely off the road or on the road, and then give them access to the direction that they need to go. Well, Todd said I had half an hour, so I shaved this down to half an hour. Before I open it up to questions, I guess I just want to, again, thank everybody for having me speak. And when I started doing this, I talked to Terry a little bit on the phone before this. She asked how long I've been doing this. And about 5 or 6 years ago, when detectable warnings became required again, I was told, well, study up this ADA stuff, and don't worry, it'll blow over in about a year or so. And here I am still talking about it. It's been a moving target. I'm sure all of you, a lot of you are nodding your heads right now. It's been a moving target. It's been a challenge. And one of the things that I hear sometimes, and I may have been guilty of saying a few times early on too, is that why are we going through a lot of this trouble and expense for a small group of people? Well, let me tell you, it's not really a small group of people. It's kind of cyclical. You've got, if I were to ask people out there, how many of you have a disability that prevents you from getting up off the street and onto a curb, probably wouldn't get a lot of hands up. If I asked you how many of you know somebody or have somebody close to you that has that kind of disability, maybe a few hands would come up. Now, if I asked you, any of you have parents or grandparents whose mobility is changing and their needs are changing, I think I'd have a lot more hands go up. And if I were to ask, is anybody out there aging? Yep, that's reality. The pictures we see here, they could very well be one of us. Federal Highways, part of this presentation that I usually give, they say that there's a 70% chance that any one of us, any one of you listening, would lose the ability to climb stairs at some time in your lifetime, whether it's temporary or permanent, we don't know. But again, that just kind of brings it back to reality. So we're all professionals, and I know we all want to do the right thing, and I know you want to do the right thing. So again, think in terms of accessibility, be aware of the requirements of the standards, the ingredients, and think in terms of accessibility. And with that, I guess we'll open it up to questions.
Thank you. We will now begin the question and answer session. If you have a question, please press 0, then 1 on your touch-tone phone. If you wish to be removed from the queue, please press 0, then 2. If you are using a speakerphone, you may need to pick the handset up first before pressing the numbers. Once again, if there are any questions, please press 0, then 1 on your touch-tone phone. And we have no questions in the queue at this time.
Okay.
We do have a question in the queue from Clayton Laurent. Please go ahead.
Hi, how you doing? I just want to tell you you did a great presentation. My question was, is there any way for us to get the slideshow that you were using for the presentation?
I don't know. Terry, are you guys going to post this somewhere?
And one more question. In regards to the ramps, I know you were saying that the standards are the ingredients to the recipe, but sometimes you have to make your own recipe. I'm located in the Virgin Islands, where most of our public access is located on the waterfront next to a harbor. So when it comes to the ramp accessibility, how would I do that? Say if we have a drainage issue where we have a drain running right next to a curb, will we have to relocate the drainage, or will we build a ramp around the drainage?
It's always probably best to try and get drainage away from the ramps. You don't want them anywhere near the ramps, or especially in the line with the ramp, because, again, in new construction, you wouldn't want that there. I would prefer to get the drainage away. Now, again, feasibility plays into it too. there may be nothing you can do. I guess you got to kind of get creative and look at your situation and do the best you can, and then document when you can't. If you can't meet a certain aspect because of drainage or something like that, then it should be documented.
Okay,
I think it's always best to keep drainage away. I think it's best to keep drainage away from the ramps. I talked to one person who's actually a wheelchair-bound person. He's the president of the Paralyzed Veterans of Michigan. And he said that if he sees standing water at the bottom of the ramp, he won't even use it because he can't see what's under it. He doesn't know if there's any potholes or dips under it. So try to keep drainage away from the ramps.
Okay, thank you.
And Terry, your line is open if you wanted to let us know if they can get that presentation.
Okay, if anyone does want to receive a copy of the recorded version of this, I can send you a copy, or it will also be available on our website in our archived webinars.
Thanks, Terry.
And there's a chat question too, Trish.
The chat question we have, is there any guidance on the use of smart levels, 2-inch versus 4-inch? Also, the accuracy of smart levels, is it 0.1%?
There's really no spec as to what tools you use to measure. The question I usually get about levels is, 4 foot, they'll use a 2-foot level or a 4-foot level. Federal Highway here used to carry a 2-foot level around, but they caught a lot of guff from our technicians because they carry the 6-foot and the 4-foot. I guess what I have to say about that is that either one you use, if you put it on a surface and you see daylight underneath it, it's not taking very good reading. So as long as you can show that it is on a flat surface anywhere you move it around on the ramp, either one should work. Again, there is no requirement or any kind of standard or spec as to what tool to use that I know of.
Thank you. Once again, for any audio.
Go ahead.
I apologize. I was just going to remind them how to queue up for any audio questions. It's 0, then 1.
Yeah, what I was going to say is that, like I mentioned earlier, I do know that attorneys have run to Home Depot and they now know how to use digital levels.
And we do have a question from Melvin Stenberg. Please go ahead.
Yes. Hi. I'm just double checking. Was it a couple years ago where everything had to be 2% where the ADA tiles were going, or am I wrong on that question?
For the detectable warnings themselves?
Yes.
Not that I know of. The 2% really was always cross slope. And on the tiles themselves, that might be what you're thinking about is people ask, does the 2% apply to on the tiles too? And that would be yes. And that's why I say with the cast iron and the stainless steel, when you're stepping on those things, be careful because trouble right on there and see that it's not 2%. The detect warning should follow the longitudinal and cross slope of the ramp.
Thank you. We have no further questions in the queue. Okay, I'm sorry. We have Melvin back on the line. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Another question. Who determines with the state of Michigan whether there's going to be rolled curb or I guess flares on where the sidewalks run into the street? Because a lot of times there's really no drawings or anything like that. Some jobs there's real good detail, where the next one there might not be barely anything. Just curious.
Yeah, the Michigan standard, we on our standard we have the type F curb ramp, which is flared, and the type R, which is rolled curb. So the designer is actually able to select which type, and a lot of times there may be combinations. Actually, we have a combination called the RF, where one side is rolled and one side is flared. Sometimes that happens. But the designer really should be the ones detailing these on the plans or calling for them by type, as we do in Michigan. So I guess that's where the original decision should be, is the designer determining what kind of ramp you need.
Okay, thank you.
Once again, you can press 0 then 1 on your telephone keypad to ask any questions. Okay, it looks like we have no further questions. Did you have any closing remarks or any last words?
No, just again, thanks for the questions. I appreciate the questions, and good luck to everyone. And we'll struggle through this together.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This concludes today's conference. Thank you for participating. You may now disconnect.